Hello, in this video I'm going to explain the process of taking a model from OpenVSP, which can include some fairly complex curves and 3D shapes like this, and bringing that into a 2D CAD program as individual slices that can be printed out like this and used to create templates for actually building the plane and sticking the slices back together again to get the actual 3D shape that you want. I actually made a video all about the basics of QCAD, which is the CAD program here that I'm using, and I also made two videos about the basics of using OpenVSP as prequels to this video, but then I've been putting it off for quite a while. And the reason that I've been putting it off is that in between OpenVSP and QCAD we need to use another software which is called Blender, and this is 3D modeling software, rendering, does a whole lot of things, animation and stuff as well. And it's quite complex and powerful, but as is often the case with complex and powerful software, the learning curve is pretty steep. And I've got to say, of all of the software that I've used over the years, Blender's learning curve is pretty rough. And I didn't really feel like explaining too much of that. I did want to cross this off my to-do list though, so what I'm going to do in this video is just tell you the very bare bones basic things that you're going to need to know about Blender in order to get this conversion done. So in this video I'm just going to assume that you know your way around QCAD already, and you know how to construct a plane model like this in OpenVSP and run some analysis on it, check that it's going to fly alright and everything. But there are a few considerations to take into account during the design phase, even before we get to exporting anything, that would make life much easier later on. So I'll just point that out now. The main one is to use real-world units and stick with them. So if I look at my wing geometry here under the plan tab, the span of this wing is 148, and that's because I've chosen centimeters for my units, mainly because they're just my units of preference anyway, but also because the the slices of foam that I'm going to be using to make this with are 3 centimeters thick. So it just helps if I can specify a whole number each time I want to give the span or the width of one of these wing sections here like this. So if we look at this one here, that's actually not a multiple of 3, that's strange. But most of them will be, so I know that, for example, this 15 is going to be 5 slices of foam. So it just gives you a better idea of where everything's going to be when you actually come to make it, especially in cases where you're transitioning between chordwise stacked slices, which is what I do for the fuselage usually. And sometimes when I have a section like this where the leading edge and the trailing edge are both straight like this from here to here, I could either make this with individual chordwise slices, or I could use a single span-wise hot wire cut to make this section, whichever way I feel like doing. But let's say I really wanted to be sure that this point here was a certain distance away from the center of the plane. In that case, yeah, I'd want to have it at a multiple of slices. Anyway, you get the idea. It just makes things easier. And the other reason is that you can then measure things in the real world, for example batteries and servos and spars and things that you might want to put in here and visualize to see how they're going to look. For servos and batteries, what I've done recently is you can put in a box like this. Oh, add. Got to click add, don't you? Okay, so we have a box there, and we can change the sizes of it like this and just sort of figure out what it's going to look like, I guess. It's not too critical probably where a servo goes, if it's going to collide with anything, because they're going to be out in the wing and the tail, but whatever. It'll give you an idea of what things are going to fit in like. For spars, unfortunately there's no cylinders in this program, but you can add a fuselage like that. And then if you go to the cross-section tab and you click cut and just keep clicking cut until nothing changes, that'll give you one section, and you can change the ends of that section to circles. And let's say I want a 1 centimeter diameter spar at each end. I'm going to change this to circle 1, and it will still look a bit funny because it's doing some blending or some it's trying to match some angles at this end here. So if we go into the skinning tab and then we click all symmetrical, and then we change the angle. So an angle of 0 there should now give us something that looks a bit like a spar. and the design tab will let us say that we want this to be, for example, 50 centimeters, and then I'm going to rotate it. In the transform tab we rotate it around Z by 90 degrees. This is only going to be half the spar here, so I can click XZ symmetry like that to make it both sides, and then I can just sort of put this somewhere where it might look right. And I've done this a few times just to sort of give me an idea. As the wingtips get narrow here, sometimes you can find that a large spar will protrude from the wing, and you might be okay with that, but you might not. So anyway, I find that it's quite useful to have all of these visualization aids in OpenVSP as opposed to adding them in Blender later. We can, of course, in Blender you can do all kinds of things. You can add boxes and cylinders and spheres and whatever you like. But because OpenVSP is the source step, it's like the first step in the chain of conversions, having it in here means that we can export this to Blender and have it in Blender as well. But if we add this stuff in Blender only, then we don't get to look at what it's going to look like in OpenVSP as well. Having said that though, there will be many cases where you want to exclude things from being exported or analyzed and so on, and I forgot to mention this in one of my earlier videos about OpenVSP, but for all of these geometry types here in the Gen tab, there is a set of checkboxes where we can assign things to be included in sets. So, for example, let's say set 0 is the things that we have, there are aerodynamic surfaces that we want to simulate when we're doing the analysis to see if the plane's going to fly well. So that would be the wing geometry, we'd put that in set 0. The pod geometry, that's the fuselage, is in set 0. The tail geometry is also in set 0. Now the fuselage geometry that we're just visualizing this to see what the spar is going to look like, that will not be in set 0. So that's just how you can assign things. Now that will be handy later on when we come to exporting, if we want to export only a subset of the objects that we have in the scene. And it's also handy, in fact it's necessary, but I should mention this. The way that we've made this spar here, this is probably going to crash the analysis program when you try and run it. So this spar here, if I just went to VSP Aero and my geometry set was all, and I click Launch Solver, I think it would crash. So what you want to do is set up a subset of the objects that you actually want to simulate here, and select that, so that will be my set 0, and then it should not crash. And a lot of the export tools also allow you to set which geometry sets you want to apply things to. Alright, so let's get on with the actual exporting. The first thing you'll want to do before making an STL file from this is to increase the resolution a bit. This one looks pretty good actually. It's because I've already made this plane and I've already done some exporting with it. But if the resolution of this grid or this tessellation on the wing is not high enough, let me just reduce it so I can show you what I mean. So under the section tab, we're looking at that section there, and let's reduce this from 12 to 4. This is more like what I would have the resolution set to when I'm running the analysis over and over, because that can slow things down if you have too much tessellation, and it doesn't really improve the accuracy of the simulation much. So this is what I would have it during the development phase, and when I'm actually coming to export it, I would make it something a little bit more like that. And the other place that you'd want to make sure that there's good resolution is on the leading edge of the wing, and it looks again pretty good because I've already exported this one, so it's fine. But you'll notice that there are quite a lot of lines right here on the leading edge, and there's not so many going across the top of the wing there. So that's controlled under the airfoil tab, and there's a checkbox here called equal arc length parameterization, and if I turn that off and on a little bit, we'll see, so I'm editing the purple line here, and you'll see that it changes the position of the spanwise lines along the wing. With the checkbox on, which it will be by default, the program is trying to keep the distance of these lines roughly equal. At least along the top of the wing they're fairly equal there, but it's kind of necessary for it to bring them closer together at the leading edge. But it doesn't bring them that close together here, and what you end up with is these blue lines are what's going to be exported to our 3D model for Blender. So we've got this nasty big sharp bit here, and the definition of this leading edge is quite coarse. And that's not really what we want, because the leading edge is a fairly important part of the wing, and if we're going to be cutting this out of plywood or something to make a template, we want to make a nice curve here. So this equal arc length parameterization, we want that to be off. And that will mean that instead of trying to make these line distances equal, it's going to bunch them all up together so that they're clustered along the leading edge a little bit closer, and we'll get much better fit to that purple line. Now, this is all very well if you're using one of these 4 series type airfoils, which gives us thickness to chord, camber location, and some options like that. But let's say you're using something else. In fact, I think pretty much any of these other options, you will not have this equal arc length parameterization option. For example, if you were using your own airfoil file, read file, look at my airfoils somewhere. So let's get this airfoil, and this is going to look all weird now, but notice that as soon as I change the type here to airfoil file, my checkbox for the equal arc length thing has gone. So I'm stuck with this horrible sharp leading edge again with no good resolution. So in order to bring back this checkbox, what you can do is this thing here, fit CST. I should have looked up what that stands for, but basically you can fit a curve or a spline or a polynomial or something like that of a certain degree or detail. 7 seems to be okay for most cases. If it's not, up to about 15 seems to help. More than 15 doesn't really help, I found, but it fits an approximation. So let's fit an approximation of our airfoil file. By the way, if you want to look at what this airfoil looks like without having to like zoom out and try and look at it, so you can't really see it there too easily, but there is a show button just here, and for some reason I found that this doesn't show up anything unless you maybe come on here and like change a value and then it'll be refreshed. Yeah. So anyway, that's what my airfoil file looks like. And I'm going to click Fit CST. Now, a very important point here, when you click Fit CST, there's no going back from this. Like, you can't undo it. Because what's going to happen is all of my options here, like this, well, there's only one for airfoil, and that's the thickness to chord ratio that I just changed there. They're going to disappear. And for this particular case, it was only one value that I changed, so that's not terrible. I might even be able to remember that by memory, what I had. But for some of the other types of airfoils, you get like 6 or 8 options, and unless you've got a copy of that written down or you've made a backup of your file here, it's going to be a real pain in the ass to get them back. So before you click Fit CST, make a backup, or at least don't click if you're not going to make a backup and you're just sort of going to export and forget about it, just don't click Save here and you should be okay. But either way, you can't go back. So anyway, let's click Fit CST and we'll see that these options will disappear and we'll get some new ones. And fortunately, the shape of the airfoil hardly changed at all. Sometimes you see a little bit of a change, but this is quite a good one. It didn't change at all. So what we have now, we have a bunch of control points for this curve that we can change. So this is the upper surface and the top. We can make that go up like this. You see the bump up there in the top, and we could make the lower surface go up as well. So put a big bump in or a big concavity in the bottom of the wing like that, and you can get very fine control over it as like a final step in your export if you wanted to. But more to the point is that we now have this equal arc length parameterization back again. So instead of having this horrible poorly defined leading edge, I can just uncheck that and everything is nice and smooth again. Alright, so the next step in the process where we actually start exporting something is to choose planar slice from underneath this analysis menu. That will show us a dialog where we can choose the number of slices and the direction to be sliced. So this is the normal to the slices that we want. So we want the y-axis to be the normal. So we select y-axis there. Slicing bounds, we will have to change that in a minute, but I'll just run it as is, and we can either use all geometries. If you've put things like spars and stuff in there as your visualizations, you'll probably want to select something else here, maybe the set of things that you actually want to export, and then click Start Slicing. So this will print out a number of things here showing you where the locations of each of those slices were, and you can see them in here in the sort of blue, turquoise and green colors. It slices up to the tail there too, but that's okay, we'll just delete that later. And it creates a new geometry called Mesh Geom, and it sets the existing geometries that we had to No Show. So they disappeared, but they were not deleted or anything, they're still there, don't worry. So this Mesh Geom is the one that we're going to export to Blender in a minute, but the slices are not in the right place, are they? So for now I'm just going to delete that, and well, we don't really need to show these again, but just to remind ourselves they are still there. Alright, so the slicing bounds need to be set a little bit more carefully, and we want more than 10 slices. So we will uncheck, it's not obvious maybe, but this yellow dot is a checkbox kind of a thing, so we can click this to uncheck it. So instead of auto, we can set the locations ourselves, and we want to start at 0, and we want to go to much further than 10. The total span of this wing is 148 centimeters, so it's 74 centimeters each side, but we need to round that up to multiple of 3, which will be 75 centimeters total distance. And the number of slices that we want is going to be this divided by 3, because each slice is 3, for my case at least, centimeters, which is going to be 25. And then we need to add one more, because we're not actually specifying the number of slices, we're specifying like the boundaries between slices. So what did I say? 25 plus 1 is 26, and I really hope I got that right. So let's slice again, and you can see now we have a bunch more slices in there. Looks good. And the way to check that you got that right is, if you look in this bunch of text here, you want to look at the Y center column, and you should see these increasing in multiples of 3, like 3, 6, 9, 12, 15 and so on. So I did get that right, that's good, and we don't need that anymore. Now we can export this as an STL file so that we can load it into Blender. So we do that by, under the File menu, we have Export, and again you might want to change the set here. So it's no longer set 0, it's, well, I'll just select the shown, because as we saw before, all of the other ones have been set to no show. So only this Mesh Geom is the one that's going to be exported if we set shown. And then we want STL file, and just click OK there. And you can see I've done this before, I have a couple of files there already. But I'm going to save this as Sky Hunterish Slices, like that. Okay, so this is Blender, and when you start it up you'll see this splash screen, and in the top right corner of the splash screen we can see that we're using version 2.8, which is a fairly recent one, and unfortunately they have changed some of the defaults about how things are selected and some of the shortcut keys that are used to control things. Fortunately, they do allow you to, under the Edit Preferences menu, to just change everything back to the old method. So if you look under the key map here, there is the option that's just called Blender. So this is the new options, and in this preferences here we can see that we can select things with either the left button or the right button of the mouse, and we have different options for what the spacebar should do when you press it. Now there are other changes as well, and I think a lot of people, including me, will just be coming in here and selecting Blender 2.7x, which is Blender 2.7 something. So this will change everything to the controls that we are familiar with, which is what I'm going to describe to you. So if you find something that I tell you here is not quite working, the key is different, or the right mouse button or the left mouse button is different. Oh, actually, it's, you have this option here. You can set it to whatever you like there. Anyway, if something's different, it's because the control scheme has been changed, and I'm using Blender 2.7x. Anyway, so we have, boy, there's so much to explain here, but I'll just see if I can get away with giving you just the bare minimum. Scroll wheel scrolls in and out. hold the middle mouse button down to rotate like this. So you can rotate things around. Shift and middle mouse button together will let you pan the view. Right mouse button will select things. So you can see we have this. And like we just saw in the preferences, it might be the left mouse button to select things. So that's why I brought that up, because it changes things quite fundamentally. You know, which button you use to select things even changes. So that's why I think a lot of people will find it very hard to kick that habit, and that's why they've left that option in there to go back to the old settings. Anyway, so we can see that we click things with the right mouse button in my case, or shift click to select multiple things. These things in the scene here, by the way, this is a light and this is a camera position, and if you hit F12 you can, this is totally off topic, but you can, why is this window so big? You can render what that camera sees from its point of view. Let's click on this just to do a little bit of practice and see what we can do with it. So when I have this selected, I can move it by hitting G, and then I'm not holding anything down anymore, no mouse buttons or anything, but I can move it around, and when I have it where I want it, I can finish the movement by clicking the left mouse button, possibly the right mouse button in your case, I'm not sure. See how annoying it is to change such a fundamental thing. And then you can do Control Z and then Control Shift Z to do undo, redo, like that. So that's movement, that was G. And if you do G and then X, Y or Z, this is X, this is Y, and this is Z, Z, whatever, you'll see that it'll move along one of those axes, whichever one you've selected. If you hold down Shift while you're moving something, it will move at about 1/10 of the speed or something like that, so you can get it very fine, small movements. If you hold down Control while you're moving, it will move in discrete increments of, in this case, if you look in the top left, the very, very top left of the screen, just under where it says File, you'll see that it has a delta of 2 meters, 4 meters, 5 meters, and so on along the y-axis. And again, when you've got it in the right place, just click the left mouse button to finish. To rotate things, you hit R, and by default you'll be rotating it around the line between your eye, or the camera point of the view, and the object's rotation point. So going round and round like that. But again, I can do X, Y, and Z to rotate it around one of these axes like that. And again, Shift to make very small rotation movements, Control to move in increments of 5 degrees by default, it looks like. Yep. And we can also scale things, which we do with the S key, like this. And again, we can do X, Y, and Z to scale, and again Shift to scale very, very slowly, or Control to move in increments of 0.1. So that is the basics of manipulating things. Not really too much more to it. To delete something, you can hit the delete key or the X key, and you'll find that keeping your left hand on the keyboard on the ASDF keys and your right hand on the mouse is the most efficient way to do everything. So if you want to delete, typically you'll probably be hitting X like this. For some reason there's a slight difference between deleting with the delete key and deleting with the X. It gives you this confirmation here, and you can delete things like that and undo. You can also select things, multiple things, by dragging with the left mouse button around them all like this. This I think is new in Blender 2.8. I don't recall being able to do this before. So if you're using an older version of Blender, you can do the same thing by using B for Bob, B for Bravo, whatever, and that'll give you this, and then you can select things like that. Now, hitting the A key will either select everything if there's something that's not selected, like that, and if you hit A again, it will deselect everything like that. And in the new control scheme, I found that you have to double tap A very quickly to deselect everything. So there's some very slight changes. Again, a little bit of a nuisance to be trying to explain all this. It's a nuisance to explain Blender to begin with, but even when you have these changes as well, it's even more of a nuisance. Anyway, so what I'm going to do is just get rid of all that stuff, because I think we're done explaining that now. Now, to bring our STL file into Blender, we are going to do File, Import, STL. Now, if this STL option is not there, have a look under Edit, Preferences, and this time we're going to look in the Add-ons tab. And there are so many add-ons that they have a search box here to let you search. So type STL, and for me at the moment this add-on is checked, and I think in Blender 2.8 it's checked by default, but in previous versions it was not checked, if I recall. I think it was because it's a third-party script that wasn't officially supported or something. But anyway, checking that checkbox there should make this STL show up. You might have to restart Blender perhaps, I'm not sure. But anyway, selecting STL here and then choosing the file that you want should find this massive plane brought into the project. And the reason it looks kind of big here is because we started off with the view with the grid. This grid here, each one of these cells in the grid is 1 meter. And the plane, as we were looking at it in OpenVSP, we were using centimeters for our units. Now this doesn't really matter that much. It's all just multiples of 10. It's quite easy to figure it out. But I will just mention that if you zoom out a bit like this, you'll find that everything disappears. And the reason for that is that using the 1 meter units, this plane here is 148 meters long, which is like 1.5 football fields, I think. So if we zoom out like this, the view that we're simulating is like flying over a football field in a plane, looking down at it, and we'd see that. And I think it just decides that the view distance is too far, so it cuts it out. It doesn't matter because you're not going to be looking at it from this far away very often anyway. But what I like to do, just to make sure that that doesn't happen and make it in a bit more of a comfortable view, is to scale this down right after you import it. So I'm going to scale everything down to 0.1. So this thing that we're looking at here is called an object, and an object is a collection of meshes. Mesh is just a bunch of polygons that form a shape, and you can see the ones at the back, even though they're not connected to the wing at the front, when I click the wing at the front, all of them get selected together because they're part of the same object. If we want to have a look at the mesh itself, there's a couple of ways we can do that. If we just want to look at it, we can hit the Z key, which will show everything in wireframe view like this, and hitting Z again will toggle in and out of that mode. If we want to actually edit the mesh, we need to hit the tab key, and that will change into mesh edit mode. So we're in object edit mode right now. Hitting tab will go like this. We can see all the individual vertices, and tab again to go back to object editing. And when we're in mesh edit mode, we can do all the same stuff, like A will select and deselect everything. We can click individually on vertices to select them, shift click to multiple. Then we can do all the stuff that we did before. So I can go like this, and then I can move them around, or I can rotate them, scale them, and so on. You'll notice though that when I selected stuff there on the top of the wing, nothing got selected on the bottom. If we want to select all the way through, which we sometimes do, whoops, undo that, which we sometimes do, we can hit the Z key while we're in this mode, and now you can see through the wing. And when I select now, I'll just Z again to make it opaque. You can see that we've selected all the way through like that. So that can be sometimes necessary if we want to, like if we wanted to chop the end of the wing off, we could do it like this, for example. Boop. Now that worked because I was in wireframe mode. If I was not in wireframe mode, it would have ended up like this. Delete. So we've deleted just the top part of the wing. So just keep in mind that you're not always selecting all the way through things when you are editing. But otherwise, it's just the same as everything else, rotating, scaling, and translating and stuff. So getting back to our slices, you can probably see that there are more vertices over here on the right hand wing than there are on the left hand wing, and that's because those are the vertices of our slices which only got exported on the one side. Now those slices are really the only thing we wanted, so we could select everything else and delete it, but it's kind of handy to keep the plane model around just for visualization purposes so that we can check that again if the spars are going to stick out or something like that. So what I'll do is I'll select everything but the slices and move it away, and we can do that by painstakingly selecting every single one like this, or we can hit the L key. That's just L, not Shift L or Control L or anything, just L, and whatever vertex you're over, it will select all of the connected vertices in that same contiguous mesh. And I can do that here. You don't need to do Shift L, you just do L again, and it will keep the selection, so it's just adding to the selection each time you hit L. Now over here I want to select everything in here, and I'm going to change into wireframe mode just briefly while I do it. And now I do need to do Shift, I think, otherwise I'll lose. Yeah, so I did Shift, select there, and then back out of wireframe mode. But the reason I went into wireframe mode, of course, is just so that I selected all the way through and got everything there. And then what I want to do with these is I'm going to move them using G, X, and then I'm going to hold down Control and move that so that it is, let's put it 20 units back, like that. Now all of this stuff is still in the same object, remember, so if I hit Tab and deselect everything, now if I click on my plane back here, I've selected my plane and the slices. Now what we want to do is separate these into different objects. So we'll go back into the mesh edit mode, and I have everything selected here. Now if I hit the P key, we can separate things by selection, which is what I want to do in this case. By the way, if you're stuck or you're just wondering about what features there may be, try hitting the space bar, and so you type something in there, and hopefully hopefully the action along with the shortcut key will be shown here. So you have to have a rough idea of what is possible in order to do this, so it's not a perfect solution for just helping you with everything, but anyway, you can see that in this case I could have found this or been reminded of this by doing the search thing. But anyway, I'm just going to hit P here, and I'm going to separate by selection. So the selected stuff at the back there is going to become one object. That's a different object. I can no longer edit that in this mesh edit mode. So if I come back out to object edit mode, yeah, I know it's confusing. Now if I select my plane at the back, the stuff at the front is no longer selected. So it's a different object. The next thing that I usually do, although it's not strictly necessary, is I'll put in something, usually a cylinder, to act as a spar, but more importantly I want to make sure that I have some sort of a feature on each one of these pieces so that I can line them up when they're printed on paper separately. And I also, of course, want to know where a spar is going to fit, so quite often what I'll do is make sure you're in object edit mode here, not mesh edit mode, otherwise it'll just be added to that object. So I'm going to select nothing, and I'm going to hit space and type cylinder, or start typing cylinder, and then there's add cylinder there. This will add a cylinder with dimensions of, looks like the radius is 1. Now I want it to have a diameter of 1. No, 0.1. So I'm going to scale this down to, so I'm going to scale it by 0.1. That'll give us a radius of 1. And then if I halve it again, now it should represent a spar of 1 centimeter diameter in real world units. And it's pretty small, so I want to scale it up. But I don't want to just scale it up like that. I want to scale it up in the Z direction. By the way, when you're scaling like this, it helps to, if you want to make something bigger, it helps to put the mouse really close to it when you start scaling. So I did SZ. That will help me to get it a bit bigger. But still, my mouse is going to go off the top of the screen here, and it's kind of awkward. But what you can do is just type in a number. If I just hit if I did 50 here, 5, 0, enter. That's another way you can scale things or rotate things without having to use the mouse. If you want to type in an explicit number to scale or move by or rotate by, you can do it that way. So I've scaled that, now it should be 50 centimeters long. And then I want to rotate it around the x-axis 90 degrees, so I just hit 90, like that. Can be quicker to use the keyboard sometimes. So anyway, this is my spar. It's still not quite long enough, so I want to scale it in the Y even. Well, let's just make it huge. Scale Y. Basically, we want to make it go through all of the wing pieces that we have there, so that should be long enough. Now, we can position this, GX, to position it like that. And it's a little bit hard to see here because this is all grey and there's no outlines, or there's no inlines, or whatever you call it, in here to define the ribs. See how they sort of blend into each other? It's kind of awkward. But nevertheless, you should be able to position this. So now I'm doing GZ to position it, and you can sort of get it, make sure it's not too close to the top or the bottom of each of those. Another thing you might like to do is change the projection from perspective, which is what we're looking at the moment. So perspective means that things in the distance look smaller. So see these grid cells here, that's 10 grid cells. They look a lot smaller than these 10 grid cells here. If you want to look at things in orthographic, you'll hit the 5 on your number pad key, number pad on your keyboard, and that will make everything perfect parallelograms. And once you've done that, you can also use the 7 and the 1 keys on your keyboard, and also the 3 key, to look at things from perfect 90-degree angles like this. Unfortunately, that's not super useful here without also doing Z, and it's still not very useful, is it? Because all these lines are such a mess. But if I zoom in enough, I can kind of see that this is the smallest rib of my wing here, and the spar is not going to be protruding from either side of it, so that's okay. Now I might want some more spars in here. In most cases I have wanted to put more spars, so let's hit tab on this spar. So now we're in mesh edit mode, everything's selected. I do shift D and then X to move that forwards, and let's say I want to put another spar here. It's not really going to be a spar, but it's more like just a positioning piece, and easier again to do this in I just hit 1 on the keypad there, and Z, so now I can see my slices a bit better. And now when I do G, it's only going to be moving things in the XZ plane, so I don't need to worry about it shifting away in the Y direction. And let's put that there. I don't want to make it too close to the front of the slice, because remember, this is going to be sanded, at least the way I've been doing things. You're going to be using the sandpaper to round that off, so this little bit here is going to be very, very thin actually. But anyway, put your spars in there like that. Another one you might want to do is, if I hit L here to select everything there, 1 on the keypad to go like that, shift D to move that over here, and then I want to scale this in the Z direction, half. I'm just making a smaller spar. This is going to be a 5mm spar. Now SX to scale it in the X direction so that it's round, and then just check that that's not going crazy here on my other spar end. So that looks quite good there. We can see that it's okay. If it's really hard to visualize, what you can also do is hit tab again to get into object edit mode, select this object, move it forward, that's GX, then I'm holding control to move it to 20 units like that. And this might be a better way to visualize what's going to happen with those spars at the end of the wing, perhaps. But anyway, looks it looks alright, so I'll just Control Z to get that back out of the way. So when you've decided where all your spars are going to be, like I say, you don't need them because we can put something else in QCAD later on to make sure that we have markers to line things up, but this just lets me do it in 3D. Now we're just about ready to do the last step, which is the actual export to QCAD or DXF. But what you might want to do if you have these spars is cut out little circles using these spars in the slices to know where they're going to line up. If you don't have spars, this doesn't matter, so you can skip this step. But let's say you've got some spars, and I'll just click on this spar object to check the name of it over here. So in this thing here we've got what is this here? Properties, I think. Yeah. So the name of this thing is called cylinder. You can change that if you want, but I'll just leave it as cylinder because we don't really need to change it. Now the reason I wanted to check the name of that is because we're going to have to look at that name in a minute. So I'll select my slices. Now this is the object that I want to cut away, and now I will, under the there's a spanner icon here, we have modifiers, so I can add a modifier, and it's going to be a Boolean modifier, and it's going to be a difference with the object called cylinder. So that's cylinder, that's why I had to check the name of it. And then you click apply, and if you did that right, now when I move my slices, we'll see that they have little circles cut out of them where the spars were. So now I can take my spars and GX to move those, let's see, 10 units forward, just to get them out of the way, and just double check that everything's okay there. So what we need to do now is, instead of having this as one object, we need to make it in multiple objects. So we're going to separate again. We do that by using P, which we saw before, but did nothing just then because I'm in object edit mode. Need to be in mesh edit mode, so tab to get into the mesh edit mode. I'll use A key to select everything, and then P should work now. But this time, instead of separating by selection, we're going to separate by loose parts. So that's that one, and then tab to get back into object edit mode. Now you'll see that each one of these slices is its own object, and we needed to do that for the next step, which is to change these from being polygons. See how they're all polygons there? We want them to be just a single curve around the outside and around the perimeter of the circles, and we do that by selecting all of them again and doing Alt C. So curve from mesh text, we'll do this. Now you'll see that the inner part of all this has now been removed, and we're just left with lines from the outside, and this is what was necessary to make it export to a 2D CAD file. We just wanted the single outside contour lines. So at this point, now we have to run the export script that I wrote to do this specific job, to export to DXF. You'll find that in the link in the description. It's just a text file which I have over here. This is my cheat sheet that I'm using while I make the video, but I'll give you this as well because it's kind of handy just as a little reminder of how things work. So export slice contours.py is a Python script, and this depends on something called DXF write, and I'll put a link in the description to where you can get this as well, and I'll also put in this slicing how-to notes file a little bit about okay, so those are the links there, and I found that on my Linux I had to run this to install the DXF write library. I don't know how it would work on Windows or Mac, sorry, but that's how it works on Linux. You need this DXF write thing to make the script work. So what I'm going to do is take this script, and I'm just going to copy that, and over here I'm going to change this from looking at the object properties, and what I'm going to look at is a text editor, and I'll just make this a little bit bigger, and I'll paste There's just a few things you might want to change. This is the path to the file that I want to use. It's just called exported.dxf, and I've given it a actual location that I want it to go to. Now there's a bunch of options here, and I don't think I'll look at them too much right now because this video is getting long already, and I'll put some detailed description of those in the slicing how-to notes right at the bottom, so maybe you could just pause the video there if you want to look at the descriptions of those. We'll just move right along. So all we have to do now is make sure that we've selected the stuff that we want to export, and then we right click in here and we select run script, and if everything works you should see no output. If something goes wrong, you'll see down the bottom here there's some sort of an error will show up. But now I can just go over to my QCAD, and it should be that file, and oh, it didn't quite work, did it? Oh, I see. It's taken the slices in the wrong order. See how there's more space between these first slices here than there are for the ones after the third slice? That's because these large ones are supposed to be taken first and placed at the bottom, working upwards. So if you want to reverse the order of those slices, actually that might be, I'll leave this in the video just to show you how you can change that if you want to. I probably should have put that as one of the options here, but if you look down here where it says sliced objects sort, you'll see reversed equals true. You can change that to false and run the script again. I think that will do what we want now. Just close these. Okay, that's looking much better. Now, like I said, the objects at the bottom here are spaced further apart. The first three ones are spaced at 200 millimeters apart, and the ones after that are spaced only at 10 millimeters apart. That's because they don't need that much space. So you can set that up to your liking by changing spacing 1 and spacing 2. So 200 is the first spacing, and then 100 is the second one, and number of spacing 1 slices is how many slices should be spaced at the further distance. And this, I just did this because typically you have a fuselage and then you have a wing, and the wings don't need much spacing and the fuselage pieces do. The other thing you probably want to do is make sure that the text labels go in the right place. So if we zoom in a bit, we kind of want this to be, well, if it was just this piece only, it would go slap in the middle, would be quite nice. But we have to consider that all of these pieces are going to be, the labels are going to go on all of them. So what we want to do is look at the smallest one, and we want this to go about there, right? So that it's going to be on the piece when we cut it out and put it on paper. So that's what these last couple of things here, labels X and labels Y. This looks like it's set up for home slice 3, I think was the last time I was using this. But what we want to do is, I'll just start moving this label, and in the bottom, the very bottom left of the screen there, you'll see an @ mark and then an XY position. This is the relative position that this thing is being moved as I move it. So I want it to go here, which is -190 and +35. So what is 517 minus 190? Well, 517 minus 200, so that's 317. And this was +35, which will be 12, right? And then run the script again. So this, hopefully, if I got that right, should put the labels in the place that I wanted. Okay, a little bit further to the right would be good. Let's put it like 330. Alright, I'm getting fussy now, but you can see what I mean. You just twiddle with those numbers a little bit and you should get it to just where you need it. Okay, that's good. Now that should be on all of these pieces. So that's probably all the exporting we need to do. And at this point we can just I don't know why this happens sometimes, but we can just delete those lines there. Jeez, how many? Alright. Alright, so the labels should be on there. So if we print these out, they'll look a little bit odd here being way over to the side, but I mean it's a lot easier than placing them all manually. Now, I said earlier that we didn't really need to add the spars here in the Blender step because we can add markers in the QCAD step to make sure everything lines up. And we can do this because we know the distance between each one of these. In this case it's 100 millimeters. So let's say we wanted some other kind of marker. Let's make a triangle or something like that, whatever. So there's a triangle here. We have a triangular spar for whatever reason. Or whatever. We just want some kind of a marker to line up all of these pieces and get them in the right place with each other. We can double click on that to select it all, and then we can do MV to move, and I'm just going to select 2 points 10 apart, and I'm going to say multiple copies 30. You can see I was doing this earlier. We have 25 slices, but remember the last slices at the bottom, the fuselage ones, are actually thicker. They were 200 millimeters apart, so I'm just going to add a few extra. I can easily delete them later. So 30 copies. Now we've got this triangle in every spar as we work down like that. And at the bottom we're going to have some extras which we can get rid of like that. But hopefully that should show you that you don't really need to add the spars in Blender. So that's, if you're really hating Blender, as I suspect some people watching this video may be by now, that's just one less thing that you need to do in Blender. You can add your pieces here in QCAD. So I think we're done. For this particular plane, some of these, like I mentioned at the beginning of the video somewhere, this cut here, I think these ribs are completely not necessary because the front section of it here is straight, so you could do that without actually making individual chord-wise slices if you wanted to. But I'll leave that up to your discretion. Hopefully that script and everything should make this step a lot easier. I had to brush up on my Python to figure out how to do it all, but I was quite glad I did, because each time I make a plane, this step, which was very painstaking and arduous, now happens almost instantly. So I hope you like it. Yeah, I think that brings us to the end of the video. Congratulations on making it all the way through if you did. Anyway, thanks for watching. Bye.